"Grandma, I wish I could thank whoever paid for my tuition." Those were the words that made my heart stop for a moment. I was sitting in the third row of the auditorium at Western Ohio State University, surrounded by proud parents, grandparents, and students wearing bright smiles and school colors. The orientation ceremony was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. My grandson Ethan was about to begin his freshman year, and I had spent 6 years quietly helping make that possible. Yet as I listened to him speak into the microphone, I realized he had no idea what I had done. At 72 years old, I had learned that silence could protect people. I had also learned that silence could hide the truth. Ethan stood confidently on the stage, taller than I remembered, his dark brown hair neatly combed, his shoulders straight with the excitement of a young man stepping into his future. The audience applauded as he thanked his family for supporting his education. Then he smiled toward the front row where my son Daniel and my daughter-in-law Rebecca sat side by side. "I especially want to thank my parents," Ethan said. "They worked incredibly hard to make sure I could attend college without worrying about tuition." The room erupted in applause. Rebecca lowered her head modestly, as though she were embarrassed by the attention. Daniel squeezed her hand. I felt my fingers tighten around the program in my lap. My chest suddenly felt heavy. Not because Ethan had thanked them. He loved his parents, and that was natural. What hurt was something much deeper. Every tuition payment, every semester bill, every textbook fee, every housing deposit. Those payments had come from me. I had never asked for recognition. In fact, I had insisted that my name stay out of it. Years earlier, after my husband Walter passed away, I sold several items that meant a great deal to me. His vintage truck, my antique jewelry collection, even a few family heirlooms I once thought I would keep forever. I quietly placed the money into a dedicated education fund for Ethan. I told myself that seeing him succeed would be reward enough. I never imagined the truth would disappear entirely. As the applause faded, Ethan continued speaking. "My mom always says family sacrifices are worth it when they help someone build a future." More applause followed. Rebecca smiled warmly and dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue. Anyone watching would have believed every word. I tried to smile too. I really did. But something felt wrong. Not just uncomfortable. Wrong. The kind of feeling that settles into your stomach and refuses to leave. When the ceremony ended, families gathered throughout the lobby. Cameras flashed. Students laughed. Proud relatives hugged each other. I watched Ethan pose for photographs with Daniel and Rebecca. Then he spotted me standing near a window and hurried over. He wrapped his arms around me. "Grandma, can you believe it?" he asked. "College starts next week." I smiled and hugged him back. "I'm very proud of you, sweetheart." He grinned. "Mom and Dad sacrificed so much to get me here." There it was again. The same sentence. The same certainty. I looked past him for a moment and saw Rebecca watching us from across the room. Our eyes met. Her smile remained perfectly in place, but something about it felt rehearsed, calculated. Then, almost immediately, she turned away and began speaking to another family. A strange chill ran through me despite the warm August afternoon. For the first time in years, I found myself asking a question I never thought I would need to ask. If Ethan didn't know where the money came from, then what exactly had he been told? And why did Rebecca seem so uncomfortable every time the subject came up? I didn't have any answers that day. Only a growing sense that a secret I had carefully protected for years had somehow become someone else's story. That evening, I drove home alone along the familiar two-lane highway that cut through miles of late summer farmland. The golden fields stretched toward the horizon beneath a pale orange sky, but I barely noticed them. My mind kept returning to Ethan's voice. "Mom and Dad sacrificed so much to get me here." I repeated the sentence over and over as if hearing it enough times might somehow make it hurt less. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the little white house Walter and I had shared for more than 40 years looked exactly the same as it always had. The porch swing moved gently in the breeze. The flower boxes beneath the windows were still full of bright red geraniums. Everything appeared peaceful. Yet inside me, something had shifted. I stepped into the kitchen and set my purse on the counter. The room felt quiet in a way that only widows truly understand. There was no television playing in the living room. No footsteps upstairs. No familiar voice asking how my day had gone. I filled a kettle with water and placed it on the stove. It had become my routine whenever life felt too heavy. Tea first, questions later. While the water heated, I opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo album. Ethan's smiling face appeared on nearly every page. Ethan holding a baseball glove at age 8. Ethan grinning beside Walter after catching his first fish. Ethan wearing an oversized graduation gown from elementary school. I traced my finger across one photograph and smiled despite everything. He had always been a good boy, kind, thoughtful, the type of young man who thanked cashiers and held doors open for strangers. That was why the situation troubled me so much. If Ethan knew the truth, he would never have ignored it, which meant someone had chosen to keep him from knowing. The kettle whistled softly. I poured the hot water into my favorite blue mug and sat at the kitchen table. Across from me stood a small wooden cabinet. Inside were years of carefully organized records. Walter used to joke that I could find any document faster than most attorneys. After he passed away, I continued keeping everything. Tax forms, investment statements, insurance papers, educational fund records. Every important piece of our family's history sat neatly labeled inside folders. I stared at the cabinet for several seconds. Then I stood up and opened it. Near the back was a thick folder marked Ethan Education Fund. My hands hesitated before pulling it free. I carried it back to the table and slowly opened the cover. The familiar paperwork greeted me immediately. Deposit confirmations, tuition receipts, housing payments, scholarship supplements. 6. Years of records carefully preserved in chronological order. I flipped through them one by one. Every payment had been made exactly as planned. Every semester had been covered. Every signature was legitimate. Nothing appeared missing. Yet one question continued to grow louder in my mind. If all the records were correct, how had the story become so different? As I turned another page, a yellow sticky note slipped from between two statements and landed on the table. I frowned. I did not remember placing it there. Slowly, I picked it up and read the handwriting. The message was short, so short that it should not have affected me. But the moment I recognized who had written it, a cold feeling settled deep in my stomach. The handwriting belonged to Rebecca. I recognized it immediately. Over the years, I had seen it on birthday cards, grocery lists, and holiday invitations. The note was attached to a copy of one of the earliest tuition statements. In neat blue ink, it read, "Thank you for handling this quietly. Ethan does not need to know where the money is coming from right now. It will only complicate things." I stared at the words for a long time. At first they seemed harmless, reasonable even. After all, keeping the fund private had been my decision. But the longer I looked at the note, the more uncomfortable I became. Something about the wording bothered me. Not where the money is coming from. Not yet. I carefully searched through the folder again. This time I was not reviewing financial records. I was looking for patterns, small details, anything I might have overlooked. Nearly 20 minutes passed before I found another document clipped behind a payment confirmation. It was a printed email from almost 4 years earlier. I vaguely remembered receiving it and saving a copy. Rebecca had written to thank me for covering a housing deposit when Ethan was preparing for college visits. Most of the message was polite and ordinary. Then one sentence caught my attention. "I will make sure he understands how much his parents are sacrificing for his future." I read it twice, then a third time. My stomach tightened. Back then, I had assumed she meant that Daniel and Rebecca were contributing in other ways. Maybe helping Ethan prepare for applications. Maybe supporting him emotionally. But sitting alone at my kitchen table years later, the sentence sounded different. It sounded deliberate. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. The tea beside me had gone cold. Outside, the sun had disappeared completely, leaving only darkness beyond the kitchen window. The house felt unusually quiet. I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking everything. Rebecca had always been organized. She liked controlling details. Perhaps she had simply explained the situation poorly. Perhaps there was an innocent explanation. Yet deep down, I knew something had changed the moment I saw Ethan on that stage. He had not sounded uncertain. He had not sounded confused. He truly believed his parents alone had paid every dollar. The next morning I woke earlier than usual. By 7 o'clock, I was already sitting at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee. I opened my laptop and began sorting through old emails stored in an archive account. Thousands of messages appeared. Most were routine. Holiday greetings, family updates, medical appointments. Then I searched one word. Tuition. More than 40 results appeared. As I reviewed them, a picture slowly began to emerge. Several messages had been exchanged directly between Rebecca and various university offices. Others involved financial planners and administrative staff. My name appeared frequently, yet in many conversations, I had been copied only during the early stages. Later messages continued without me. Around 10 o'clock, I found something that made me stop breathing for a moment. It was an email chain from 18 months earlier. One university administrator had accidentally included me on a reply. The message was brief. We have updated the donor acknowledgement records as requested. Future correspondence will be sent directly to the parents. Below that was Rebecca's response. Thank you. That will make things much simpler moving forward. I sat motionless, staring at the screen. For the first time, I could no longer dismiss my concerns as imagination. Someone had gone out of there. Way to remove me from the story. The question was no longer whether it had happened. The question was why. For the next several days, I said nothing to anyone. I did not call Daniel. I did not confront Rebecca. I did not even mention my concerns to Ethan. Instead, I continued my normal routines. I watered my flowers each morning. I attended church on Sunday. I met my friend Carol for coffee at the diner on Main Street. From the outside, everything appeared unchanged. Inside, however, I was paying attention in a way I never had before. Once a question enters your mind, it has a way of changing how you see the past. Small memories that once seemed harmless begin to take on new meaning. One afternoon, I found myself looking through old family photographs. There was Ethan at 16, smiling beside Rebecca after receiving an academic award. I remembered that day clearly. During the celebration dinner, one of the teachers had congratulated Rebecca for helping cover Ethan's future college expenses. At the time, I thought little of it. Rebecca had smiled and accepted the compliment. I had assumed the teacher simply did not know the full story. Now I wondered whether the misunderstanding had been allowed to happen on purpose. More memories surfaced. Thanksgiving dinners, graduation ceremonies, family gatherings. Again and again, I recalled hearing comments that gave Daniel and Rebecca full credit for plans I had quietly funded. What troubled me most was not that I had gone unrecognized. Recognition had never been my goal. What troubled me was the possibility that a false story had been carefully built over many years. The following Tuesday, an unexpected opportunity arrived. I was sorting mail when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name I had not seen in quite some time. It was Richard Benson, the financial advisor who had helped me establish Ethan's education fund years earlier. After exchanging greetings, we spoke about ordinary things for several minutes. Then he mentioned Ethan's enrollment at the university. You must be proud, he said. That fund accomplished exactly what you hoped it would. I smiled. I am proud. There was a brief pause on the line. Then, Richard added something that immediately caught my attention. I always thought it was unusual when your daughter-in-law requested all future communication go through her office email. My grip tightened around the phone. I kept my voice calm. Requested? Richard hesitated. Perhaps I should not have mentioned it. I assumed everyone was aware. I moved to the kitchen table and sat down slowly. Aware of what, Richard? Another pause followed. Several years ago, Rebecca asked that donor correspondence and financial summaries be sent directly to her. She said she was coordinating family records and wanted to avoid confusing Ethan. I stared through the window above my sink. The autumn leaves outside shifted gently in the wind. Did she explain why my name needed to be removed? I asked quietly. Richard sounded uncomfortable. Not exactly. She simply said it would make things easier if Ethan believed the support was coming through his parents. The room suddenly felt very still. Richard continued speaking, but I barely heard the rest. At last, I had confirmation that this was not a misunderstanding. It was not an accident. It was not a forgotten detail. Someone had deliberately rewritten the story. And for reasons I still did not fully understand, that someone was Rebecca. After my conversation with Richard, I stopped looking for innocent explanations. That did not mean I was angry. Surprisingly, I felt something closer to clarity. For weeks, confusion had followed me everywhere. Now I finally knew that my instincts had been right. The story Ethan believed had not appeared by accident. It had been carefully shaped over time. The next question was how far that story extended. 2 days later, I received part of the answer. It happened during a lunch at a small restaurant near downtown Columbus. My sister Helen and I met there every month. We ordered soup and sandwiches, exchanged family updates, and talked about ordinary things. Halfway through the meal, she mentioned Ethan's college plans. Rebecca must be relieved, Helen said. After everything she did to pay for school. I looked up from my coffee. What do you mean? Helen seemed surprised by the question. Well, everyone knows how much she sacrificed. She told the family she took on extra consulting projects for years to build Ethan's education fund. I said nothing. Helen continued speaking. Honestly, I always admired her for that. Most parents would not work that hard. The restaurant suddenly felt quieter. I could hear the soft clinking of dishes from the kitchen and the low conversations from nearby tables. Rebecca had not simply accepted credit when people offered it. She had actively created the narrative herself. Did she tell everyone that? I asked carefully. Helen nodded. Several times. At family gatherings. Birthday parties. Even last Christmas. I stirred my coffee slowly. Interesting. Helen studied my face. Margaret, is something wrong? I forced a small smile. I am just thinking. That afternoon, I drove home with a growing sense of disbelief. The more I learned, the larger the picture became. What began as a hidden acknowledgement had evolved into something much bigger. Rebecca had spent years presenting herself as the architect of Ethan's future. Family members believed it. Friends believed it. Apparently, even Ethan believed it. Yet the facts sitting inside my filing cabinet told a completely different story. That evening, I opened my records again. This time I focused on dates, payments, correspondence, public events. Slowly I built a timeline. Every major contribution matched a period when Rebecca later described making sacrifices. Every financial milestone seemed to have been absorbed into the version of events she shared with others. Around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text message from Ethan. A photograph appeared on the screen. He was standing in front of his dormitory building, smiling beneath a bright blue sky. First week is going great, Grandma. Thank you for always believing in me. I stared at the message for a long moment. My eyes filled with tears. Not because of what he wrote, but because of what he did not know. Ethan was not part of the deception. He was living inside it. For the first time since this began, I understood exactly what mattered. My goal was not exposing Rebecca. My goal was protecting Ethan from a lie that had surrounded him for years. And deep down, I had a feeling that an even bigger secret was still waiting to be uncovered. The bigger secret revealed itself almost by accident. A week after Ethan started classes, I attended a community fundraiser at the public library. It was one of those small local events where everyone seemed to know everyone else. I spent most of the evening speaking with neighbors, browsing silent auction items, and enjoying homemade desserts. Near the end of the event, I found myself standing beside a woman named Patricia Monroe. She had known Rebecca through a regional professional association for several years. Our conversation began casually. We talked about the weather, retirement, and grandchildren. Then Patricia mentioned Ethan. Rebecca must finally be able to relax now that all those education expenses are behind her. The familiar sentence landed like a stone in my chest. I smiled politely. What makes you say that? Patricia laughed softly. Oh, she talked about it all the time. The fundraising campaigns, the family contributions, all the extra support she organized. I felt a chill despite the warm room. Fundraising campaigns. Patricia nodded. Yes, several of us contributed. Not huge amounts. A few $100s here and there. We all thought it was going toward Ethan's college fund. I remained perfectly still. I see. Patricia continued without noticing my reaction. Rebecca always seemed so grateful. She said every little bit helped. The room suddenly felt smaller. The conversations around me faded into the background. Family contributions, community donations, extra support. None of those funds appeared anywhere in the records I had reviewed. Not once. Not in 6 years of statements. Not in a single tuition payment. When I returned home that evening, I went straight to the filing cabinet. I spread documents across the dining room table and began reviewing them again. Tuition invoices, housing bills, meal plans, registration fees. Every expense had already been covered. There had been no funding gaps, no emergency shortages, no periods where outside donations would have been necessary. By midnight, a troubling possibility had begun to take shape. If people had contributed money believing they were helping Ethan attend college, where had that money gone? The next morning, I searched through old family emails and social media posts. It did not take long to find references. Charity golf outings, scholarship-themed fundraisers, holiday donation drives, small community collections. Rebecca had mentioned them repeatedly over the years. The amounts were never enormous individually, but together they added up to something significant. More importantly, the messages all shared the same theme: helping Ethan achieve his dream. I sat quietly at my computer as realization settled over me. The false story was larger than I had imagined. It extended beyond our family. Friends believed it. Neighbors believed it. Entire groups of people believed they were helping build Ethan's future. Yet the future they thought they were funding had already been secured years earlier. I leaned back in my chair and stared at a photograph sitting on the bookshelf. Walter smiled back at me from a fishing trip we had taken decades ago. He always had a simple way of looking at problems. Follow the facts. Ignore the noise. The facts were leading somewhere important now. And for the first time, I began to suspect that Rebecca was hiding more than misplaced credit. She might be hiding a financial trail that she never expected anyone to follow. Over the next 2 weeks, I became something I had never expected to be at 72 years old: an investigator of my own family history. Every morning, I sat at the dining room table with a notebook, a cup of coffee, and another piece of the puzzle. The facts accumulated slowly. A donation mentioned in an old newsletter. A fundraising dinner announced on social media. A community scholarship drive organized by Rebecca's professional network. None of it looked suspicious on its own. Together, however, the pattern was impossible to ignore. What surprised me most was how carefully everything had been framed around Ethan. Every event carried the same message: helping a hardworking young man achieve his dream of higher education. People naturally wanted to help. They admired Ethan. They believed they were supporting his future. One afternoon, I received another unexpected phone call. This time it came from Linda Harper, a retired school administrator who had known our family for years. We exchanged pleasantries before she brought up Ethan's first semester. "You must be relieved that all those fundraising efforts paid off," she said warmly. I asked her the same question I had begun asking everyone. "What fundraising efforts?" There was a brief silence. Then Linda sounded confused. "Rebecca never told you?" My heart sank. "Told me what?" Linda explained that several years earlier, Rebecca had approached local donors about creating an informal support network for Ethan's future education expenses. Some people contributed once. Others contributed annually. According to Linda, the project became surprisingly successful because so many people admired Ethan's academic achievements. After ending the call, I sat quietly for several minutes. The house seemed unusually still. The clock on the wall ticked softly. A lawn mower hummed somewhere down the street. Ordinary sounds. Yet my thoughts were anything but ordinary. The amount of money involved was no longer my primary concern. What disturbed me was the deception itself. Dozens of people had acted out of generosity. They believed they were helping a young man pursue an education. Instead, they had been supporting a narrative built on omissions and half-truths. That evening, Ethan called to tell me about his classes. He sounded excited. One professor had encouraged him to apply for a research program. Another had praised his first assignment. Listening to him talk reminded me why I had remained silent for so long. Ethan deserved the opportunity to build his future without carrying the weight of adult conflicts. Before hanging up, he said something that stayed with me long after the conversation ended. "Mom keeps talking about student loans after graduation," he said casually. "She says we will need to review some paperwork eventually." I felt my pulse quicken. "What kind of paperwork?" Ethan laughed softly. "I'm not sure. She said she would explain later." After the call ended, I stared at the dark screen of my phone. For months, perhaps years, Rebecca had controlled the story. Now another piece had fallen into place. Whatever she planned to discuss with Ethan after graduation was important enough that she had already begun preparing him for it. And for the first time since this entire situation began, I realized I could not remain a passive observer much longer. The following month brought an opportunity one had not expected. Western Ohio State University announced a family appreciation event for scholarship recipients, donors, and relatives. Ethan called me as soon as he heard about it. He sounded excited. "You should come, Grandma. They are inviting families to campus for a special dinner." I agreed immediately. After we hung up, I sat quietly at the kitchen table. Something told me this event would matter. Over the next several weeks, I continued gathering information. I did not need to search aggressively anymore. Pieces of the truth seemed to find me on their own. Former donors shared memories of conversations with Rebecca. Old emails surfaced. Community newsletters mentioned fundraising efforts that I had never known existed. By now, The pattern was undeniable. Yet I still resisted the urge to confront anyone. Facts carried more weight than accusations. Walter had taught me that years ago. The evening of the university event arrived on a cool autumn Friday. The campus looked beautiful beneath strings of lights hanging between brick buildings. Students and families filled the walkways. Laughter drifted through the air. Ethan greeted me near the entrance with a wide smile and a warm hug. For a few moments, I allowed myself to enjoy the evening without thinking about secrets or investigations. He showed me his dormitory. He introduced me to friends. He spoke enthusiastically about classes, professors, and future plans. Watching him, I felt proud. Whatever mistakes others had made, Ethan himself remained exactly the young man I hoped he would become. Later, everyone gathered inside a banquet hall. Round tables filled the room. University administrators welcomed guests and thanked families for supporting students. Rebecca sat beside Daniel near the front. She looked confident and comfortable, as though she belonged at the center of every conversation. During dinner, several speakers shared stories about sacrifice and educational opportunity. Then one administrator stepped to the podium with a stack of papers. "Tonight," he announced, "we would also like to recognize individuals whose quiet generosity helped make student success possible." The room applauded politely. I paid little attention at first. Universities honor donors all the time. Then the speaker began discussing private educational support funds established by family members. My attention sharpened immediately. He continued reading names and stories. A few minutes later, he paused. One example involves a student whose college journey was made possible through years of careful planning and extraordinary dedication from a family member who requested no public recognition. My heart began to beat faster. Ethan looked toward the stage with curiosity. Rebecca shifted slightly in her chair. The administrator smiled. "Fortunately, we recently received permission to acknowledge that contribution." For the first time all evening, I noticed uncertainty cross Rebecca's face. Only for a second, then it disappeared, but I had seen it. The administrator looked down at his notes and prepared to continue. Across the room, conversations faded. The hall grew quiet. And in that moment, I realized the truth was about to step into the light whether Rebecca was ready for it or not. The administrator adjusted his glasses and looked out across the banquet hall. This student's educational fund was established more than 6 years ago by a family member who requested complete privacy. Semester after semester, tuition, housing, books, and fees were paid through that fund. Tonight, we would like to recognize Margaret Sullivan for her extraordinary generosity and commitment to her grandson's future. For a moment, the room seemed frozen. I heard a few surprised murmurs. Then applause began to spread through the hall. Ethan turned toward me so quickly that his chair nearly scraped the floor. The expression on his face was something I will never forget. Confusion, shock, disbelief. Rebecca stared at the stage. The confident smile she had worn throughout the evening was gone. Daniel looked from me to Rebecca and back again, as if trying to understand what he had just heard. The administrator continued speaking. He described the fund. He explained how it had quietly supported Ethan's education for years. He thanked me for choosing generosity over recognition. Every sentence brought another piece of the truth into the open. I had not requested this moment. I had not planned it. Yet somehow it felt right. Not because I wanted attention, but because the truth finally stood on its own. When the applause ended, Ethan walked directly toward me. His eyes were wet. "Grandma," he said softly. "Was it really you?" I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart." He sat beside me and lowered his voice. "Why did nobody tell me?" I glanced briefly toward Rebecca before looking back at him. "I wanted you to focus on your future. That was always the most important thing." Ethan shook his head slowly. All this time I thought. His voice faded. He did not finish the sentence because he no longer needed to. For the first time, he understood. Later that evening, after most guests had left, Daniel approached me alone. He looked exhausted. Older somehow. "Mom," he said quietly. I had no idea. I believed him. The disappointment on his face seemed genuine. "Then perhaps there are things you should ask Rebecca," I replied. He nodded without arguing. Across the room, Rebecca remained unusually silent. She avoided conversations and left earlier than anyone else. In the weeks that followed, many difficult discussions took place. Questions were asked. Records were reviewed. Explanations were offered. Some relationships changed permanently. Others slowly healed. The process was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was simply the natural consequence of truth replacing fiction. The greatest surprise came from Ethan. He began calling me every Sunday afternoon. Sometimes we talked about classes. Sometimes we talked about life. Occasionally we talked about his grandfather, Walter. The conversations became one of my favorite parts of each week. One crisp autumn afternoon, several months later, Ethan visited my house during a school break. We sat together on the porch swing watching leaves drift across the yard. "You know," he said, "I used to think success was about money." I smiled. "And now?" He looked out toward the trees. "Now I think it is about knowing who stood beside you when nobody was looking." I felt a lump rise in my throat. After everything that had happened, that simple sentence meant more to me than any public recognition ever could. In the end, the greatest gift was not the fund, the tuition, or the years of sacrifice. It was the return of something far more valuable. The truth had found its way home. And so had my grandson.